Hi, everyone. My name is Bhavani Patel, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Be the Change by Beam Data. And we are a nonpartisan civic action app that connects Pennsylvanians to the PA General Assembly to provide legislative input and to keep you updated on different policy updates that are coming out of Harrisburg. And today, we're lucky to have Senator Sharif Street with us to talk about a bill, a proposal to legalize and tax adult use cannabis. Thank you, Senator Street, for being here today with us. I'd kind of like to just get right into it and start off with a sort of personal question that can kind of ground us. Could you tell us what this bill personally means to you? I think it's quite an accomplishment that there's a bipartisan proposal on the table to legalize and tax adult use cannabis in the PA legislature, just given that there's been so many conversations that have happened in the past year, and then also some of the gridlock that we've been seeing coming out of PA.
Look, I'm certainly very excited about the fact that we've gotten we're going to be able to move a cannabis bill, and having bipartisan support matters. I mean, Pennsylvania has a Republican majorities in the Senate and the House, and we have a Democratic governor. And so in order to do things, we have to do them in a bipartisan way. And I think cannabis is certainly an issue that deserves bipartisan support, given the fact that the public overwhelmingly supports it in a bipartisan way.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so I guess diving a little bit deeper, people of all backgrounds and sort of walks of life are feeling the negative economic impacts of COVID-19. And I think that it's quite significant that the timing of this bill is coming now. What are your thoughts on how this proposal will help PA recover economically, and to what extent do you think that that'll be happening?
Well, look, I think anything that we can do to strengthen our economy in the midst of COVID is certainly important. One of those things that we can do is one of the groups that's really been hurting our small farmers, and this cannabis bill will help our agricultural community. We put provisions in that allow a variety of grow licenses, and so we fully anticipate some of our smaller farmers will be able to engage in growing cannabis. We also have social equity licenses, so a lot of folks who are in communities that are affected by the war of drugs, who are normally left out, they'll be able to engage. And the micro grow licenses will allow small businesses who tend to be more likely to hire people from within communities will grow. And finally, major cannabis and the overall increase in cannabis revenue will provide valuable tax revenue that will allow us to deal with our budget, help us deal with our budget crisis, invest in education, and things like that without having to dramatically raise taxes. So I think it's an overall positive impact, to say nothing of there's a whole cannabis tourism industry that also will likely grow as a result of this legislation.
And so I kind of want to push a little bit harder. You mentioned communities of color. And so how does the proposal prioritize the needs of communities of color? There are specific elements, as you mentioned, that you and Senator Laughlin have laid out that take into consideration social equity, and you mentioned the social equity licenses. Can you elaborate a little bit more?
Well, certainly the cannabis. So, first, a little background for people that may not have it. Although cannabis usage amongst people of color, Black and brown folks as well as white folks, is roughly the same. Black and brown people are four to six times more likely to encounter law enforcement as a result of cannabis usage. And so, as a result, over time, a lot more Black and brown people have, per capita, have cannabis convictions. This bill would expunge or seal the records of all individuals who previously been convicted of a cannabis-related offense. And so that would create tremendous economic opportunities for people whose career options have been limited because of the cannabis convictions. Certainly, there are poor folks that have been impacted as well, but this will have a disproportionately positive impact on Black and brown communities. Similarly, because the Black and brown communities were more disproportionately affected by the war on drugs and the war on cannabis, the social equity licenses will be targeted towards those communities that have been disproportionately impacted, and that will also help communities of color. And then finally, we know that because of wealth disparities, there are more likely people who are people of color are more likely to be starting up small businesses as opposed to large businesses. So the fact that we create opportunities with low barriers to entry with micro grow licenses creates opportunities for all people who are sort of small business people. But we know that business people in communities of color are more likely to be small businesses than they are larger businesses because of the historic wealth gap.
Yeah. So in the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned farmers. And so how does the proposal ensure that small farmers are not sort of being excluded from the opportunities of this new crop when they're trying to compete with larger and more well-resourced institutions that are going to try to come to Pennsylvania if we do take this route?
Well, like I said, I was alluded to a little earlier. We have tiered licenses. So let's say you're a small farmer and you're not going to be, and you're not prepared to, to fully invest in the way that you need to be a major grower processor, but you do want to be a grower at some level. You'll be able to get an intermediate level. There'll be intermediate level licensing that would allow you to grow. The other thing we're going to have is the fact that we're going to have a cannabis control board, which will allow to grow and contract the canopy of overall cannabis that can grow in a way that meets the needs, and also will keep large competitors from just growing so much cannabis that they sort of just drop the price everyone else out of the market, and then raise the price, which happens, which we see happen in some markets around the country. And so what we're looking at is a really responsible way where we initially remove barriers to entry, so that initially we know that there will be some smaller growers in the market, and then we're going to have a cannabis control board that will sort of protect against some of the more predatory practices that large growers use, not only in cannabis but in other industries, to keep them from squeezing out the smaller providers.
Yeah. This is a massive undertaking. There's a lot of details to this bill. And so whenever you and Senator Laughlin were kind of, thinking about this, what sort of process did you guys implement to kind of get public input or sort of think about the real world experiences of how people feel about this right now and taking that into consideration?
Well, look, I mean, I think people are there. First of all, most people believe that what we're doing with cannabis currently doesn't work, and that we need to have some form of adult use legalization. Over 3/4 of Republicans, over 4 out of 5 Democrats. So it's vastly positive in both Democratic and Republican circles. That being said, people think about things like, what are we going to do with DUI laws? So we have provisions that will address incapacitation. So we know that you may have cannabinoids present in your system for 30 days, but you're not actually incapacitated for 30 days. So there needs to be a way to distinguish. And so we're looking at provisions that would judge incapacitation, not merely the presence of any cannabinoids. So we can effectively enforce workplace laws, including driving laws. We're looking at, people are concerned about, hey, is there going to be, are smaller business people going to be able to be engaged? And that's why we have micro grow licenses, and they want to be, so that we're making sure it's an inclusive process, as well as our social equity licenses. People have said to us, what about all the folks who are already convicted of crimes? And that's why we have the plan to expunge or seal the records of all people who previously been convicted of a cannabis crime. And people are asking us about home grow, because there are folks who say, look, it's still going to be expensive. This is something I can grow at home, and I need it. And so we're looking at a very limited home grow for personal use program. So we've worked with a lot of the groups like Philly Normal, really all the normals around the state, Lehigh Valley Normal, Allegheny Normal. We have talked with groups like DACO, the Diasporic Alliance for Cannabis Opportunities, which is focusing on making sure people of color are included in the cannabis space. We've held 2 big cannabis conferences with three big cannabis conferences now, with over 1,000 people attending a 2-day conference at Temple Med School. I think one year was 2,000 people. And so we've done countless forums organized by some small groups, some industry-led, some grassroots level, talking with people from around the Commonwealth about their ideas and their input, which we think we have fairly captured in the bill. But we're not done. We're still having conversations. And indeed, people are going to see your podcast and they're going to say, I saw Senator Street on Ms. Patel's podcast, and let me get involved because I've got a great idea and an idea that will perhaps make the bill that much better.
Okay. You referred to Democrats and Republicans. And so I think I was, it's exciting that there's bipartisan support. Republicans have raised some concerns. So for the audience, could you kind of outline some of those concerns, but then also talk about, what's being done to kind of mitigate those concerns and answer some of those questions so that we can keep moving forward?
Well, a lot of it's just education. I mean, there was initially a few years talk about cannabis as a gateway drug. We now have plenty of data that suggests that addiction to opioids actually drops in places where you have the recreational adult use legalization of cannabis. People have talked about keeping it out of the hands of kids, teenagers, and what we found is that you have a much better chance of doing that in a controlled, regulated market than you do in a place where we have a vibrant black market like we do right now. The guy in an alley doesn't care whether you're 16 or 21. He just wants the money for his product. People who are at a reputable, clean, regulated cannabis dispensary will be checking ID, and if they're not, and if they provide cannabis to people underage, they'll lose their licenses. And so there will be strict penalties for people, for license holders who sell cannabis to underage. I guess would-be customers. So look, I think we've really thought this through, and a lot of it's just been education. The sort of reefer madness of the Nixon era, put in the minds of some folks, just a lot of half-truths and mistruths. And now that we have real data, real evidence, we're able to dispel a lot of those things. And I think that Republicans and Democrats are much more likely to be in a comfortable space around this bill. And I think that's why we're going to get over the line. And I thank Senator Laughlin for his courage in partnering with me.
Yeah, that's great. So my last question, Be the Change is truly committed to building more civic engagement at the state level in Pennsylvania. That's why we exist. That's why you're here. That's why we're hosting this conversation. And so if you had to leave our audience with one piece of advice in terms of how they can get more involved with state government and to support this bill, to have their voices heard, what would you leave them with?
Look, I think they can look at my website. They can go to my social media accounts. You can call their legislature. You can come out to one of our conferences, which we anticipate in the fall we'll be able to do in a hybrid way. There'll be some people in person and some people virtually. There are so many ways to get engaged. But what I would say, whether it's sending a tweet, going online, looking at a Facebook post, or reaching out and volunteering with Philly Normal or the Diaspora Alliance for Cannabis Opportunities, we want you to get engaged in this discussion and in this process. And more generally, you should be engaged in any discussion that is of great public import in your community. Every one of us is represented by one member of the House, one member of the Senate. And although our districts are large and diverse, particularly those in the Senate, we still have an obligation to pay attention to our constituents. And when you reach out to us and you talk to us, you have a better opportunity of getting a result you want, and we are better legislators for it. So I thank you for the question. I thank you for creating an opportunity for us to have this public engagement. And I thank you for being a part of a free press, because a free press is an essential element to a robust democracy, and that's what we all want.
Well, there you have it, folks. Advice from Senator Street. Thank you, Senator Street, for giving us some more insight and knowledge about this issue. And don't forget to check out Be the Change at changeourstate.com.